I am Tara Jane and Hari Cruz. This is ABM Podcast. Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission, well, it's pretty simple. We take a crucial piece of information, like this really detailed article from Alpha Business Media looking at Nepal, and we really try to unpack it for you.
Yeah, cut through the noise, pull out the important bits.
Exactly. Find those little nuggets that make the whole picture clearer. Today, we're diving deep into small and medium enterprises, SMEs, in Nepal. Specifically, the big pressures they're facing right now, sort of mid-2025.
That's right. The source material gives us a pretty comprehensive look. We're talking rising costs, supply chain instability, shifts in, consumer demand.
But it's not just the problems, right?
No, not at all. It also digs into how these Nepalese SMEs are actually adapting, what they're doing to cope, and crucially, what support is supposedly out there for them.
It sounds like a really dynamic and probably quite tough situation on the ground. So our goal today is to give you, our listener, a shortcut to understanding what's really happening. We'll look at the big picture, then drill down.
And see how businesses are fighting back. Let's get into it.
Okay, so setting the scene. Nepal's economy in mid-2025, the article paints it as, what, a mixed bag.
Yeah, pretty much. There's definitely a sense of recovery, after the pandemic and related pressures. But there are also some really persistent challenges hanging around.
You see that straight away in the GDP forecasts, don't you, for this fiscal year?
Absolutely. You got the ADB, World Bank, IMF. They're all slightly different, somewhere between, 4.2% and maybe 4.9%.
And the government's own target is 4.61% for this year, aiming for 6% next year. That range itself screams uncertainty, doesn't it?
It really does. It shows how hard it is to predict the exact path. The article points to the main growth drivers being, consumption.
Which is heavily reliant on remittances, yeah.
Hugely. That money sent home is vital. Plus, there's rising investment, especially in things like infrastructure, hydropower, and hopefully tourism picking up again.
These things should help SMEs, creating demand.
In theory, yes. But that reliance on remittances, you mentioned it, that's a potential vulnerability.
Yeah, what happens if things change drastically in the countries where Nepalese are working? It feels risky.
It absolutely is. It ties Nepal's domestic economy very closely to global job markets and stability. Policy-wise, the article mentions the central bank, Nepal Rashtra Bank, has been cautiously easing monetary policy. So interest rates have come down a bit.
And on the fiscal side, government spending.
They're trying to consolidate spending overall, but also boost capital expenditure, investment in projects. The budget for the next fiscal year, FY 2025-26, is pretty substantial, around NPR 1.96 trillion.
And those policies directly hit SMEs, right? Access to finance, borrowing costs, how much demand government spending creates. But even with their easing, the article really seems to hammer home inflation as a major issue.
Oh, definitely. Now, the headline, Consumer Price Index, the CPI, it was actually quite low in mid-April 2025, about 3.39%. That's down from the year before.
Okay, that sounds good.
Well, yes and no, because just a few months earlier, mid-January, it spiked to over 5.4%.
Yeah.
And that volatility, that's the key thing for businesses.
Ah, right. So it's unpredictable.
Exactly. The annual forecasts for this year are hovering around 5%, maybe 5.5%.
Yeah.
And even that kind of moderate inflation is a big deal if you're an SME running on thin margins.
And the Wholesale Price Index, the WPI, that tracks costs for businesses more directly, doesn't it?
It does. And that was higher, 4.20% in mid-April. Yeah. It's a clearer signal of pressure building up in the supply chain, on input costs.
Okay, so the overall number might hide some pain points.
Precisely. And when you dig into the CPI components, wow. Overall food inflation looked low in April, 2.45%.
Yeah.
The specific things, ghee and oils up over 11%, fruits over 9%, legumes over 6.5%.
And that January spike you mentioned.
Yeah, vegetable prices jumped, get this, 28.52% year on year.
28%. Imagine running a restaurant or a small food business. That's devastating.
Absolutely crippling. And non-food inflation wasn't insignificant either, nearly 4% in April. Things like miscellaneous goods and services up almost 9%, clothing and footwear over 7%. These hit a wide range of SMEs.
And the article even mentions regional differences, higher inflation in some areas.
Yes, the mountain region in Koshi province saw higher rates, suggesting some local factors are amplifying these pressures. The causes seem to be a mix.
Not just one thing.
No, it's like normal harvests impacting prices, inflation spilling over from India, global stuff like tariffs and geopolitical tensions, definitely domestic supply chain snags, and interestingly, the IMF flagged maybe even subdued domestic demand playing a part.
So a perfect storm almost. But you keep coming back to the volatility. Why is that so damaging?
Because it makes planning a nightmare for SMEs. How do you manage inventory? How do you set your prices?
Hmm.
How do you forecast your cash flow when the cost of something absolutely core to your business can suddenly jump 10, 20% in just a few months? That uncertainty can honestly be worse than steady, predictable inflation, even if that steady rate is a bit higher.
And the article makes a really crucial point here, doesn't it? About the mismatch between that headline CPI, like the 3.39% in April, and what SMEs are actually paying for some things, like the wholesale price for consumer goods up nearly 10%.
Exactly. The aggregate data just doesn't tell the whole story. The reality for many SMEs is much tougher than those national averages suggest. Their specific costs are rising much faster.
In remittances, again, they boost demand. But if inflation eats away at their value,
Then the expected boost in spending might not be as strong as hoped. It's a complex interplay.
plus there's the risk of policy issues. The World Bank flagged that.
Yeah, things like policy incoherence or just poor implementation, delays in spending the government's capital budget, or sudden policy changes. It just adds another layer of uncertainty that makes it incredibly hard for businesses to plan and invest confidently.
A stable policy environment seems absolutely vital, and it sounds like there are still risks there.
Okay, let's dig deeper into those operating costs. Raw materials seem like a huge one. A major one, yes. The Confederation of Nepalese Industries, the CNI, their surveys found a really significant jump in the share of imported raw materials used in manufacturing. It hit over 51% in the second quarter of the fiscal year, 81-82, that's roughly late 2024, early 2025.
Over half imported. That makes businesses incredibly vulnerable, doesn't it? Global prices, exchange rates.
Totally. And it's not just global prices. The article mentions Pashilo Foods, an SME that actually struggled to find quality local materials, so they were forced to import, driving up their costs.
So it's a double whammy reliance on imports and sometimes lack of good local options.
And then you layer on Nepal's specific challenges, the geography being landlocked, weak transport infrastructure. It all adds cost, just getting materials in and moving them around. Those wholesale price increases we talked about, like consumer goods, WPI near 10%, really show that pressure on inputs.
So manufacturing, retail, they're feeling the squeeze. What about energy? The article says generation capacity is way up. Nearly everyone has electricity access. That sounds positive.
It sounds great. But here's the catch, and it's a real aha moment from that CNI survey. Despite all that capacity and access, over 60%, 60 of industrial firms still use generators.
Generators. Why?
Because the power quality is unreliable. Frequent outages, voltage fluctuations, they just can't rely on the grid for consistent power.
So they're burning diesel, maintaining machines. That must add a huge cost.
It does. The article calls it a reliability fee. CNI found it adds nearly 12% to manufacturing costs on average. Businesses have to invest in backup systems, buy fuel constantly. It shows the problem isn't just making enough power, it's getting reliable, stable power to the businesses.
The government seems aware, right? There are recommendations for lower prices, tax breaks for IT.
Yeah, there's awareness, but the article flags uncertainty about how effective or widespread these measures will actually be on the ground. And of course, fuel for those generators and for transport is still a big cost tied to global oil prices.
Okay, what about wages and labor?
Well, the wage index growth actually slowed down a bit to about 2.6% year-on-year recently.
So less pressure there compared to inflation.
The rate slowed, but wages are still rising costs. And crucially, it varies hugely by region. One province saw over 8% wage growth, others much less. So the pressure really depends where you are.
And if wages grew 2.6%, but inflation was higher, maybe 3.4% or even 5%, does that mean real wages are falling?
That's a possible implication, yeah. Less purchasing power for workers. Although the article notes government civil servants got a cost of living allowance increase, which could push up wage expectations in the private sector too. A challenge for SMEs.
And finding skilled workers is still hard due to migration.
Yes, that's a persistent issue. Adds training costs, impacts productivity. There's a long-term government plan, but no quick fix.
Right. What about rent and financing? Rent's always a big overhead.
Specific rent data is limited in the source, but it's likely linked to that high inflation in miscellaneous goods and services. Definitely a major cost for many. Financing, though, that's flagged as critical. Interest rates have come down a bit, average around 9.18% recently.
Which is better than before.
It is. It helps. But businesses are still feeling the hangover from past high rates, and high rates fundamentally hurt profitability. But honestly, for SMEs, the bigger issue often isn't just the rate. It's getting the loan in the first place.
Access is the problem.
Huge problem. tough collateral requirements, often higher effective rates than big companies get, just difficulty securing funds, especially if you're a startup or need long-term investment cash.
And this is where the FNCCI, the Federation of Nepalese Chambers of Commerce and Industry, makes that striking point, right? About banks having loads of cash but not lending it.
Exactly. They point out this paradox. Banks apparently have something like NPR 600 billion ready to lend, but restrictive central bank guidelines are stopping it from flowing, especially to SMEs and startups.
So the money's there, but it can't get to where it's needed. A last mile problem.
That sums it up perfectly. Lowering the main interest rate doesn't help much if rules around collateral or lending criteria block SMEs from actually accessing that liquidity. It's a major disconnect.
Okay, so costs are up everywhere. Materials, energy, despite the grid, labor, finance access is tough. Now, how are they dealing with supply chains? That sounds like another minefield.
It is internal logistics.
Huh.
That's a long-standing challenge. The mountains, being landlocked, poor roads. It just costs more to move things around inside Nepal. The World Bank mentions weak competition in transport, too.
And the CNI survey points to things like admin barriers, bad road quality, traffic jams.
Right, big road projects are happening, but they don't solve today's problems of delays and extra costs for SMEs. Then there's cross-border trade.
Nepal's really exposed there, isn't it?
Highly exposed, vulnerable to global tariffs, trade uncertainty. The article mentions potential U.S. tariffs causing jitters and things like the NTPP trade preference program ending soon.
That adds risk for exporters.
Definitely. And most trade is with India and China, so any disruption in those corridors hits hard. Plus, Nepal imports, well, almost everything, as the National Planning Commission apparently said. So global supply chain chaos directly impacts input availability and costs for nearly everyone.
Dependent on imports, vulnerable globally, difficult domestically, and customs clearance adds another layer.
Oh, yeah. Big bottleneck. Problems with documents, tariff complexities, classification disputes. It all leads to delays.
Meaning extra costs, storage, fines.
Storage fines, lost sales if you miss delivery dates. There's apparently a lack of coordination between agencies, not enough automation.
That national single window thing isn't fully working yet.
Only partially implemented, it seems. So businesses still deal with lots of paperwork, multiple offices. It just adds time and cost, making Nepalese SMEs less competitive, especially traders.
Wow. Caught between rising costs and complex, fragile supply chains. Okay, let's flip to the demand side. How are consumers changing?
The article calls it shifting sands. Inflation, even moderate, hits purchasing power hard, especially for essentials. If real wages aren't keeping up, household budgets get squeezed.
And the CNI survey flagged low disposable income as a major challenge.
Exactly. So consumers get cautious. They delay big purchases, focus on necessities, hunt for value. The IMF's worry about subdued domestic demand fits right in. Even with remittances helping, SMEs can't just assume people will buy. They need strong value propositions.
But there are mixed signals on overall demand. ADB optimistic, World Bank less so.
Right. ADB sees robust consumption from remittances and lower inflation. World Bank noted a regional slowdown, downgraded Nepal partly due to floods and financial sector issues. It's confusing.
But the CNI survey did show some recent recovery in demand.
Yeah, compared to the previous quarter, there were signs of improvement in market demand overall, and for manufacturing specifically. So maybe not collapsing, but definitely uncertain for businesses trying to forecast.
And beyond just how much people are buying, how they're buying is changing too, right?
Fundamentally, higher prices make people shop smarter. But the huge shift is digitalization. E-commerce is booming, more internet, more smartphones, digital payments getting easier. Platforms like Daraz, SaaS2Deal are growing.
And digital marketing is now essential. Social media research before buying.
Huge percentage doing that. It means SMEs have to be online, marketing digitally. That needs skills, investment. But there are still hurdles, personally, distrust of online payments sometimes, people still wanting to see things in person. It could create a digital divide.
And the trend towards sustainable, eco-friendly products.
Yeah, conscious consumption.
Yeah.
Opens up niche opportunities, but means investing in sustainable practices, maybe getting certifications.
How does this play out across different sectors?
Unevenly. Retailers face bargain hunters. Clothing gets hit by material costs and online competition. Hospitality has tourism recovery, but volatile food costs. Services like IT see rising costs, but also growing demand. Manufacturing has input cost pressure, but maybe some demand recovery. SMEs really need to watch their specific niche.
So given this perfect storm costs, supply issues, shifting demand, how are they coping? The article talks about resilience, adaptation.
They're definitely not just sitting back. Cost management is priority one. Negotiating with suppliers, cutting waste, trying to be energy efficient, even with the reliability issues. Optimizing inventory, cutting non-essentials. Things businesses everywhere do, but it's critical now.
They have to find savings somewhere.
Absolutely. And they're actively tweaking supply chains. Those Reed project cases, Poshilo Foods, Harilo Agro, they worked hard to find better, more reliable suppliers, sometimes local ones, sometimes alternatives.
Managing cash flow must be key with volatile costs, so inventory optimization helps there.
Crucial. Tied up cash is risky. The article mentions strategies like using freight forwarders, pre-clearance, multimodal transport, even tech like AI or blockchain for better tracking, though maybe that's more for larger SMEs.
And digital transformation is a big adaptation.
It's huge. Using digital for marketing, sales, reaching customers online, the growth in digital payments helps make transactions smoother.
So digital isn't just one thing, it enables other adaptations.
Exactly. Reaching new markets, improving efficiency. And then there's innovation in products and services.
Like the ready-to-eat food trend, or Poshilo Foods redesigning traditional sattu.
Perfect examples. Or finding niches like sustainable products. Diversifying markets like Poshilo exporting reduces risk. It seems the challenges are actually forcing innovation for many.
Those case studies you mentioned, Poshilo and Harilo, they really show how specific support helps, don't they?
They really do. Poshilo got help with training, procedures, supplier partnerships, consulting, result. Expanded markets, exports, sales growth, jobs.
And Harilo Agro, quality issues, finding suppliers.
They got quality audits, training, help setting up controls, supplier assistance, result, income growth, jobs, better supply, and quality. It shows targeted support can yield real, measurable results.
Okay, so adaptation is happening. What about the bigger support system? Government, industry bodies, development partners? How does the article assess them?
Well, the government's putting some things in place. The FY 25-26 budget has specific SME startup items, like NPR's $730 million for soft loans at 3% interest, a 5-year income tax break for eligible startups.
And those IT sector tax breaks, green energy incentives.
Yes, 75% off export income tax for IT, lower rates, tax exemptions for green energy gear, 5-year tax holiday, plus broader reforms, easier foreign investment rules, digital company registration, one-stop shops, lower minimum FDI, favoring domestic goods and procurement. Positive steps on paper.
But the crucial question is always implementation and accessibility, right?
Exactly. That's the rub. Industry bodies like FNCCI and CNI are also key. FNCCI lobbies hard on policy relaxing lending rules, promoting tech, attracting investment, formalizing the informal sector.
And CNI provides that vital data from surveys, advocating for clearer strategy, tax reforms, promoting local products.
Development partners like the World Bank are active too. The Reed Project, economic analysis, policy advice. The ADB provides forecasts, supports infrastructure, energy, digital projects. There are other initiatives too, regional funds, university incubators.
So there is an ecosystem, but how well is it working? What are the gaps?
The gaps. Despite all these efforts, access to finance is still the critical barrier. That point comes up again and again. SMEs struggle with collateral, effective rates can still be high, startups find it incredibly tough. That FNCCI point about banks holding cash but not lending due to restrictive guidelines, that's the core last mile problem right there.
It really seems to be the central bottleneck.
It does. Other gaps. SMEs often don't even know about the support schemes available. Programs might not reach everywhere or cover all sectors. Coordination between different support providers can be weak.
And policy inconsistency, unpredictability.
Big issues flagged by the World Bank and FNCCI. If policies change suddenly or benefits get canceled, it kills business confidence. Plus, the huge informal sector is largely excluded from official support. And fundamentally, government capacity to actually implement policies effectively needs strengthening.
So ambitious plans, but major hurdles in delivery, especially finance. Looking ahead then, beyond mid-2025, what's the outlook? Cautiously optimistic.
That seems to be the consensus from the big forecasters, World Bank, ADB, IMF, UN, DESA. They see growth potentially accelerating in FY26, FY27, maybe hitting 5% or more. But, and it's a big but, it all depends on maintaining policy stability and actually implementing those reforms.
And the risks are still there. Financial sector issues, policy wobbles, budget execution delays.
Absolutely. Those temper the optimism. The IMF suggests things like better credit guarantees and linking SMEs to multinationals could help long term. FNCCI, CNI are cautiously optimistic too, but link it directly to policy stability. They want a clear decade of investment.
What about those deep-rooted structural challenges? They don't just disappear, right?
No way. Poor infrastructure transport, unreliable power keeps adding costs. Limited private sector capacity, being landlocked. Those persist. Access to finance remains the critical long-term hurdle. It needs structural fixes, not just rate tweaks.
Policy instability, bureaucracy, enforcement issues, constant headaches.
Plus the skilled worker shortage, climate change risks, and a really big one coming up,
Yeah.
LDC graduation in 2026.
Right, graduating from least developed country status. That means potentially losing trade preferences.
Exactly. Which means Nepalese SMEs will need to become much more competitive internationally. A huge challenge.
But there are opportunities, too.
Definitely. Digitalization is massive efficiency, reach, innovation. The IT BPO sector is growing fast. Green economy opportunities, renewables, efficiency, better regional trade links, tourism recovery, modernizing agriculture for value add, and a growing middle class driving domestic demand.
So how to grab those opportunities while tackling the challenges? What are the key strategic needs?
Number one, stable, predictable policy. Absolutely fundamental. Number two, massively improve SME access to finance, review the rules, expand guarantees, promote alternatives. It's non-negotiable.
Investing in people skills training.
Essential. Keep investing in infrastructure, transport, energy, digital. Promote innovation and tech adoption. Simplify procedures, cut red tape, support climate adaptation and sustainability. And crucially, it needs coordinated effort from everyone, government, private sector, partners.
The article also briefly compares Nepal to the region. Are these challenges unique?
Not really. SMEs across South Asia, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Sri Lanka face similar pressures. Inflation, supply chain woes, and especially that chronic difficulty accessing finance, high rates, collateral, paperwork. It's a regional theme.
And cautious consumers, governments with limited fiscal space, also common.
Yeah. Adaptation strategies and support differ slightly. India's funds, Bangladesh simplifying rules, but the overall effectiveness is often mixed, hampered by bureaucracy, instability, just like in Nepal.
So SMEs everywhere are trying similar things. Cost-cutting, niches, digital, unevenly diversifying suppliers. Nepal's not alone, but maybe its specific context like geography amplifies some issues.
That's a good way to put it. The challenges are common. The context makes them particularly sharp in Nepal.
This has been, well, a really thorough deep dive, pulling out the key threads from that Alpha Business Media piece on Nepalese SMEs in mid-2025.
Yeah, it paints a picture of intense pressure costs, supply demand, but also real resilience and adaptation. And a support system that exists, but has significant room for improvement, especially getting finance flowing.
So what does this mean for you, the listener? I think it shows how vital it is to look past headlines, understand the reality businesses face on the ground. It's a case study in adaptation, but also shows the limits and importance of policy and support.
Right. The potential is there, but unlocking it means tackling those specific, persistent constraints SMEs face.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to chew on. Given Nepal's deep structural challenges being landlocked, import dependence, those policy implementation gaps, we talked about how much can SME resilience and targeted support really move the needle against those massive limitations. What kind of truly transformative long-term vision is needed to fundamentally change the game for Nepalese SMEs and unlock sustainable growth?
A really vital question. This analysis helps frame why it's so important.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We hope taking this one source and unpacking it has given you a clearer, more informed perspective on a critical part of Nepal's economy.
Until next time.